You lay your finger on the trigger and trim your breath until the reticle steadies, convinced that one clean shot will settle everything. But in Stalingrad, one clean shot settles almost nothing. Cold does more work than courage. Dust blinds faster than fear. Silence squeezes the nerves until your hands tremble for reasons you will not admit. Why would you not last a day? Because what you think you know about patience, control, and precision is smaller than the city that intends to swallow it. You carry modern habits without noticing. Waiting makes your thumb reach for a phone that is not there. You want to fill the pause with a gesture, any gesture. Here, each extra gesture is a signal. Each unnecessary movement is an invitation. In peace, habits kill time. In Stalingrad, time kills you when you let habit speak louder than discipline. So the question is not only how stable your muzzle is, the question is whether you can subtract every reflex that does not serve survival. You will reach the end having learned 3 hard truths. First, the environment is stronger than your mastery. In a city of shattered walls, smoke, wind, ash, and broken sightlines, mathematics turns approximate and ideal shots become rare. Second, the rules are heavier than your fear. Sectors, orders, silence, rotations, and the group's pattern of movement form an iron frame that you do not bend without breaking something crucial. Third, the body quits before the ammunition. Hunger dulls the mind, cold erases fingers, thirst slows judgment, and a sleepless eye jitters at the moment it must be still. Hold these in mind and step into the maze. You are among ruins along the Volga. The river breathes a chill into every corridor of rubble. The city has been on fire and falling apart for months. The wind drives ash into the seams of your clothes. Distances lie here. What looks like a short span through a broken floor is crossed by pockets of smoke, cavities that echo, and stairwells that turn footsteps into signals. You bring a rifle with a scope. You have a shelter half, a canteen, a few rounds, a strip of cloth to break reflection, and more silence than you believed possible. The rules are simple and hard. Camouflage outweighs tally. Quiet outweighs glory. Waiting lasts longer than contact. Nothing you do will alter those ratios. You learn, or you are learned by them. Work begins where fantasy ends. You move not like a hunter in a field, but like a patient in a narrow corridor, touching every surface with care because sound travels in strange ways. Brick dust is your crawling ground. You prefer it because it crushes soft and covers you, even as it creeps into your mouth. You discover that breathing is not a passive act. Breath becomes a discipline, a metronome set slower than comfort, because the scope vibrates with your pulse. You bargain with your eyelids. They want to blink. You ask them for a few more beats. Distances are deceptive. 2 short blocks across the skeleton of an apartment complex feel like a continent once you add smoke that drifts, windows that frame you, and corridors that let someone else hear your cloth snag. You do not correct a miss with a second shot. You earn a second shot by not needing one. You reframe the day. It is no longer divided into hours. It is a sequence of observed, shifted, waited, moved, froze, listened, and unseen. A pause that would be nothing in civilian life becomes a decision point with consequences. You feel urgency rise when a target moves, the reflex to press and finish the job. You stop. The silhouette is gone. You learn that wanting a shot is the best way to lose one. You look for shelter and find holes. A roof is a luxury. A corner with a shadow is a home. A gap in a wall that faces another gap matters more than a full room with one open side, because a full room turns you into a framed portrait. The wind is a surgeon here, slicing through gaps with the sharpness of glass. The shelter half becomes a ceiling, a door, a curtain, and a liability. It hushes drafts and then, with the smallest motion, flutters enough to be noticed. The Volga brings ash on its breath. The scope metal bites the cheekbone, and the butt plate presses into a shoulder that is already stiff from holding still. At night, the air can cut hard enough to turn breath into steam you cannot afford, so you breathe into your sleeve and accept the staleness. The objective of a shelter is not comfort, it is invisibility. You select angles that face a crossroads of attention, not the open street, because the open street is simple geometry, and the human eye loves simple geometry. You trade comfort for invisibility and do not argue with the price, because comfort makes you soft in both senses of the word. Hunger enters quietly. You do not dine, you intercept calories. The cook's fire draws shells like a magnet draws filings, so meals are fragments. You take what fits in a pocket and lasts without heat. Water is the snow that becomes a weight in a canteen after it melts. Fire gives away position. You use your body to warm the canteen instead and wait for the slowness to do its work. Sugar is a medicine you ration. You do not swallow a rush and let your hands shake. You learn to sip water because too much forces your body to ask for movement you cannot afford. You notice jealousy, a human and embarrassing detail. When a neighbor crunches bread at the moment, you pretend you have forgotten appetite. Self-control looks noble from a distance. From here it looks practical and small, like breaking a biscuit in deliberate halves and stopping at one half. Safety is not a force field. It is a net held by the people around you, and nets sag and tear if you pull on them for yourself. You do not move because you feel like it. You move when sectors allow, when the line breathes in and out with a rhythm that keeps camouflage from colliding. The slogan about standing fast is not a poster here. It is a system. Wandering from a post is not romantic defiance. It is subtraction from a pattern that holds more than your life. The worst enemy is not always the one in your crosshair. Sometimes it is the one with a scope, watching the spot where your curiosity will make you peek again. You teach yourself to resist the second look, which is the look that kills. You listen to the absence of sound as if it were a radio. Silence packs information. A quiet corridor means someone waits for you to forget how patient you promised to be. Safety belongs to the group. One cough can pull a string that empties the effort of a squad. Courage, in this context, often looks like compliance. Health turns into a line item you track at the micro level because no one else has time to do it. Dust penetrates everything. It coats lashes and settles in the corners of eyes until tears want to clear the grit. You cannot let them. You half close one eye to control the moisture line and keep the reticle from smearing. Cold does not announce itself with dramatic notes. It takes sensation away in small handfuls. The trigger becomes a weight. The stock becomes a foreign object. The cheek weld loses warmth faster than you can replace it. Wounds come as fragments more often than single clean injuries. You learn enough bandaging to hold yourself together until a medic can move, and a medic moves under rules more strict than yours. Prevention is the only medicine on demand. Dry if you can manage it, layered if you can improvise it. Dry is rare. Snow melts into boots. Sweat chills under cloth. Concrete stores cold like a memory and returns it whenever you touch. Sleep is a ration. Without it, your scope draws an oval where a circle should be. Rotations exist not because someone thinks you deserve a nap, but because a shaking reticle wastes everyone's effort. You calm your heart by counting beats into the trigger finger, and the steadiness buys you a few quiet breaths before the tremor returns. Then the city reminds you that it is alive in its own way. Smoke blurs edges. It hides you and erases what you intend to see. Soot settles on glass and forces the small, risky act of cleaning. A flash of clean glass can betray more than a footprint. Heat rises where fires still simmer under beams, and the air stacks in columns that warp the path of a bullet. The tidy formulas you drilled for wind become educated guesses because drafts twist between broken walls and slide down corridors at surprising speeds. You make corrections in meters per second by intuition, and intuition is honest about its limits. The smell of burned material becomes a wall that stands between your ear and the tiny sounds you need, and the brain compensates by inventing noises it wants to hear. Slush sucks at boot soles and makes the smallest walk a broadcast. After an explosion, the powder of the city lifts into a temporary fog, and for a minute everything is gray and uncommitted, including your confidence. The perfect shot does not live here. You make the least imperfect choice you can and accept that this is success. You are not a lone actor, no matter what stories later might prefer. Words are rationed because air carries them to ears that do not belong to you. Letters home shrink into cautious paragraphs that say little and mean a lot. The habit of telling how it was becomes a liability while you are still inside the event. What earns respect is not a tale. It is the quiet checklist you demonstrate without pointing to it. You show up when you should, you do not spoil a camouflage setup, you hold still. When every nerve argues for movement, you take a field of view and keep it without complaint. A squad is not a crowd. It is a set of promises spoken once and honored repeatedly. You trade the pronoun I for the pronoun we, because we is the reason the corner you use will still exist an hour from now. We is also the reason you remain unremarkable, and unremarkable is the highest compliment available in a place that punishes drama. Across hours, a pattern emerges that has nothing cinematic in it, and everything human. You enter a vacant room and your body wants to stand near the window because the window is light, and light is comfort. You count to 3 and pick the darkness instead. You see a shape that might be a helmet, and you want the story that comes from scoring the hit. You check the background and let the story die, in favor of not revealing yourself to the person who is counting on you to be impatient. You feel pride, the natural surge that comes when a plan works, and you mute it because pride has a physical form in the body, and forms have edges, and edges catch eyes. You miss the warmth of speech and let it pass, because the smallest joke has a way of echoing in concrete shells that act like amplifiers. You rank your needs and discover that dignity often means taking care of basic maintenance in conditions that deny privacy. You want to be remembered for skill. You learn that in this place skill looks like restraint. By late day, your back is a ledger of micro pains you did not notice arriving. Your shoulders hold tension in layers that begin with the rifle's weight and end with the obligation to keep breathing slowly. Your jaw is tight from clenching so that teeth do not chatter with cold. Your lips are split from air that will not hold moisture. The cheekbone that carries the scope's kiss is red and numb. You have not smiled in a while because smiling uses muscles that would prefer not to be noticed, and you have trained yourself to reduce the number of moving parts in your face. Hard experience teaches you that the body's smallest traits can give you away. You watch how the city changes with light. Morning advances from smoke gray to a pale color that never becomes bright. Noon is not a blaze. It is a flat wash that still leaves enough shadow to hide people who know what they are doing. Evening returns quickly with the kind of speed that fools you into misjudging time. You learn to estimate the day not by a clock you do not have, but by how far you can see into rooms across the street, and whether smoke looks blue or brown. You listen to the wind's character and notice that certain directions carry a distinct sound, a clue you add to the set you hold in your head. You adjust placements because a corridor that was harmless in the morning becomes a conduit in the afternoon when drafts change. You become a student of nothing glamorous: soot patterns, chipped paint, torn cloth, a scrap of paper that moves when air moves, all of it useful. The rifle becomes a partner that adds demands instead of removing them. You keep its bolt quiet with care that borders on reverence, because metal on metal can tick loud in ruined structures. You wrap what you can without compromising function. You avoid touching the barrel with bare skin longer than a moment, because the barrel will teach you a lesson about heat you would rather not learn. You improvise covers for glass, not only against weather, but against glare. You hold discipline around the simple act of checking the chamber. You count without moving lips. Your trigger finger learns to resolve the difference between pressure and motion under conditions that erase that difference for most people. You never slam the rifle down when you return to cover, not because you fear scratching it, but because you fear telling someone on the other side of a wall that you are here. At certain moments you doubt yourself for reasons that make sense. Did you choose a vantage point that seems clever to you, but obvious to someone who thinks like you? Did you move too soon because boredom is a pressure you underestimated? Did you ignore a tiny glint that will now be someone else's answer? Doubt is healthy until it becomes motion. You talk yourself into stillness. You learn that courage is rarely a forward step in this work. Courage is resisting the urge to fix what is not broken, to add a flourish, to take ownership of something that belongs to the group pattern, to make noise because silence feels like failure. You finish a day without a dramatic outcome and accept that this is a victory. In a lull, you allow your mind to drift to the things that do not exist here, and you realize what they are worth. A warm room is not simply comfort. It is a resource that preserves aim. Clean water from a tap is not merely civilized. It is a protective measure that keeps your mind fast. A functioning clinic is not an abstract good. It means infections that never start and fevers that never erase a week of focus. Predictable rules enforced without reference to battle are not bureaucracy. They are a background that lets you live without scanning every second. When you remove those supports, everything becomes a calculation. You hoard patience. You budget motion. You manage thoughts like inventory. At night, you wrap into yourself as far as fabric allows and consider what the day taught that you did not already know. You learned once more that the environment makes the final call. You might be careful and still fail because the wind moved in a way that no formula predicted, because smoke thickened at the wrong moment, because a reflected wink of light drew attention. You learned that the rules, which looked like a cage in the morning, were a skeleton by evening. Orders, sectors, silence, rotations, an agreed pace of movement. These kept a set of people alive who would have otherwise become isolated bodies. You learned that your body, which you assumed was an obedient machine, has a mind of its own. It wants warmth, water, sleep, and food, and when it does not get them, it writes its protests into your hands and eyes. You learned that pride is expensive here, and that reliability makes a better currency. Sleep does not come easily in a city that has not stopped making noise for months. The ear, trained to hear danger in small sounds, will not turn off because you asked. The mind, trained to delay reward, offers dreams that are mostly unfinished tasks. You rest in pieces. You wake with the lightness of a person who did not truly fall into deep sleep and decide that a partial recharge is better than none. Morning is not a fresh start so much as a continuation. You review your loadout like a ritual. You find your place not by marking territory, but by matching your need to the group's need. You restore the slow breath that turns the scope into a truthful instrument. You begin to sense how thin the layer is between ordinary life and this. People imagine a border between peace and war as if it were a cliff. It feels more like a line drawn on a window with fog, one wipe, and the scene changes. What does not change is human limitation. You cannot be a perfect machine. You can only be a person who adapts faster than a city can rearrange your plans. The city, however, has the advantage of mass. It imposes conditions. You comply or you become evidence of what happens when someone refuses to accept conditions. You remember the opening question, why would today's habits harm you here? Because the city punishes noise and rewards seeking motion. Because attention is a finite resource, and this place taxes it harder than your daily life ever did. Because the things you think you own, like your schedule and your comfort, are privileges, and when they vanish, you meet the untrained version of yourself. The trained version is built on repetition that looks dull and acts like armor. If you must have a tidy conclusion, make it honest. The first truth is that the environment outweighs mastery. You can know ballistics, breathing, positions, and all the clever tricks of a specialist. Put them under smoke, ash, unpredictable wind, and cold metal against skin, and they become approximations that must be updated every minute. The second truth is that rules outweigh bravery. It takes more discipline to stay in the pattern than to lunge for independence. The pattern is not romantic. It is survival divided into parts and shared among people. Break it, and you invite consequences faster than any enemy could manufacture alone. The third truth is that the body quits before the cartridge count does. Cold reduces hands to sticks, thirst gives you slow thoughts, hunger sands off the edge of reaction, and lack of sleep makes your eye lie about what it sees. You cannot will those losses away. You can only budget against them and hope you guessed right. So no, you would not last a day if you tried to import your ordinary reflexes into this place and asked your body to behave as if it were well-fed, warm, hydrated, and rested. Lasting a day here means deleting most of what makes you comfortable and replacing it with practices that feel small and boring. Hold still, say little, plan the next move inside the group's lattice work, treat your hands like instruments that can be detuned by cold or pride, and accept that success is often the absence of a headline. The people who endure this are not superhuman. They are exacting in unglamorous ways. They understand that time can be either a weapon or a leak. They patch the leaks and use the weapon. You admire them from far away and imagine how you would perform. The truth is that admiration is easy. Replication is hard. This city was built of stone and steel, and then rebuilt of ash and patience do not care whether you think you are ready. They require proof in stillness, in silence, in the tiny movements you refuse to make. That is the price. Those who pay it do not talk about it until later, and even then they do not say much. They were busy learning how to last the next day. Morning comes without ceremony, and hands you the same city with a slightly different arrangement of shadows. You repeat the quiet sequence that keeps you part of the pattern. You check the chamber by touch, not sound. You slide a cloth across the glass with the care you reserve for a sleeping child. Then you pause because even that comparison feels like needless decoration, and you are trying to remove anything that distracts. Your world narrows to rectangles and lines. You mark sight lines with memory, a stairwell, 2 buildings over that frames a sliver of roof, a torn curtain that shifts when air moves, a chipped sill that looks like a head until the light changes. The routine is patient and specific, the kind of work that never earns applause because when it goes right, nothing happens. You move positions with the rhythm you practiced, no big steps. Each placement is a decision about risk that you fold into muscle memory, so you do not have to calculate it while exposed. You learn to map the city by how sound travels. Certain corridors act like tubes. A dropped screw at one end has a way of arriving at the other end louder. Certain piles of debris absorb sound. Your boots go mute for a moment, and you feel grateful on a scale that would have confused you before. You run a quiet audit on your gear. Cloth to dull the metal, a strip of tape to interrupt a shiny edge, a square of burlap to turn your outline less human. The scope is the same, the rifle is the same, the air is not. The air is never the same in a broken city. That is why you keep your plans flexible and your rules strict. You start the day by reacquainting yourself with stillness. Stillness is not absence. Stillness is a job. It is a set of micro-adjustments in the joints that relieve pressure without producing visible motion. It is the slow setting of the jaw so your teeth do not click. It is the tongue placed in a way that manages the impulse to cough. It is the eyes working together without the dramatic blink your nerves request. Your breathing sits on a low shelf, less than comfortable, more than dangerous. You do not aim yet. You let the reticle rest on nothing in particular and let your heartbeat decline from the soft hurry, induced by the short crawl that brought you here. If someone watched you, they would think you are doing nothing. You are doing something very hard. You watch and do the math that does not reach paper. You measure a distance by how many bricks fit between 2 points, aware that bricks are not the same length everywhere and that ruins have a way of breaking geometry. You account for draft with a guess that has been improved by repetition. A scrap of paper in the far room lifts from a floor, and you infer speed and direction because you have seen that motion before. You place potential routes in your head for someone who might try to cross the space, and you assign to each route a cost. You ask whether you could stop that route, not whether you want to. Want is not a helpful category here. Capability is. The city sets you tests that do not look like tests. A cat crosses a void, and your eye snaps to it because it is alive, and your body is still tuned for life. You bring your attention back and note the time you lost. A curtain flaps, and you wait for the second motion before deciding wind or intention. A burned desk leg falls and clacks against concrete, and your pulse bumps and then settles because your head edits the sound into the harmless column. Experience is mostly the accumulation of edited sounds. Fear still works, only on a delay you control. You perform small acts of maintenance on yourself that have no drama. You flex your toes one at a time inside boots so that when it is time to move, they remember how. You roll your shoulders a fraction so blood returns to the muscles that must keep the rifle steady. You check the way your cheek sits against the stock and make the tiniest change so the pressure is consistent. You accept that the cold will take your focus in tiny drafts, and you plan for it by bundling attention, not fabric. You repeat tiny phrases in your head that are not slogans, just reminders, simple and literal. Slow breath, soft finger, wait first, check again, do less. They sound boring because they are, and that is why they work. You share time with others in a way that respects silence as a resource. When you hand off a sector, you do it with a squeeze or a short sign, not a whisper, because even a whisper is a broadcast if the room is built for echoes. When you trade places, you are careful not to leave marks that will teach someone what to expect next time. If you scuff dust away with a knee, you scuff again in an irregular pattern so the next person cannot read a path. If you used a shard of mirror to bring light to a dark spot, you return it to a position that does not give away the trick. Discipline is not only about what you do, it is about what you undo when you are finished. You catch a glimpse that will tempt most people. An outline resolves, almost a person, almost a helmet, almost motion that matters. You do not believe almost. You check the frame around the outline. You ask whether someone built that outline for a person like you to notice. Doubt is not fear. Doubt is a tool. You wait through 3 breaths and then 1 more. The outline shifts in a way that contradicts human motion. The draft is responsible. You do nothing. Doing nothing saves you more often than action, and you let that fact sit in your mind without dressing it up as wisdom. It is a plain truth, and you will keep it in plain language because plain language survives stress better. In late morning, the city requests movement, and you comply on its schedule, not yours. You do not select a path because it feels short. You choose a path that keeps you inside the group's pattern and uses the city's noise to mask your own. There is a crumpled beam outside that falls sometimes as the heat from hidden embers changes shape. You time your crawl to its random punctuation. There is a tram line 2 streets over where a broken wheel still bangs in wind. You move when it bangs because the pattern will hide your smaller pattern. You do not own the city's soundtrack, but you can borrow it for cover. You feel a tug that comes from pride, the urge to change your plan, because the new spot looks exciting. You resolve it by naming the cost. A new spot you have not tested under different lights, angles you have not checked from the other side, lines you have not traced for echo. You remind yourself that excitement is not an argument. You retain the spot you know and let the exciting spot exist as a possibility you will approach only when it fits the net, not when it flatters your sense of initiative. Then comes the patient duel that people imagine but rarely understand. You are not firing back and forth across a clear gap. You are measuring patience against someone who has learned similar lessons under similar pressures. You show nothing. They show nothing. You both adjust by fractions behind cover and wait for the other to mistake boredom for a signal. Boredom is dangerous. It dresses itself as intuition. You meet it with facts. The last time the light made that window look like a face was yesterday at this hour. The draft lifts that curtain twice in quick sequence when the wind is from a certain quarter. The shoulder pain you feel wants you to move and is not a strategic message. You win by letting the opponent's confidence age into action before yours does. Sometimes there is no win. Sometimes both of you prove durable and both of you leave when the group's plan says to leave. Survival without incident is a score you learn to respect. Food appears like a note slipped under a door, a piece of hard bread, a slice of something you cannot name by taste, and do not need to name because naming is a luxury. You take half and leave half if someone else might need it. The water in your canteen has learned the smell of the cloth you used to warm it. You drink slow and listen to your throat not to cough. You have done more demanding tasks in your life that earned affection and thanks. This task asks for nothing but a steady hand and a steady silence, and returns nothing you can display. It feels honest in a way that is hard to explain outside. Afternoon brings a shift in wind, and you recalculate. The figure 8 of air through the rooms across from you creates a complex of motion that was not present earlier. You add it to the model you hold in your head. Smoke slides lower and makes it look like the ground has taken a breath. You clean the lens again, slower than before. You consider a new angle that would avoid glare and find that the small change in position creates a silhouette where there was none. You keep the glare and accept the work of controlling it with micro tilts. You tell yourself again that ideal conditions are not the objective. Acceptable conditions are. Messages from elsewhere arrive as sensations, not words. The tremor in the wall means a shell landed outside a perimeter you cannot see. The faint smell of oil means someone nearby is working a bolt they should have checked before stepping into the corridor. You hope they learned the lesson without a penalty. The tiny grit that lands on your tongue is a reminder that the air is a moving surface covered with parts of the city. You swallow and drink when you can, not when you want. The body keeps asking for normal rhythms. You keep telling it no with a voice that is calm and patient. This is not cruelty. It is administration. You think of what your day would have looked like elsewhere, and you understand the distance between that person and this one. Elsewhere you have doors that latch and floors that do not crumble. Elsewhere you can make a sound without rehearsing it. Elsewhere you can misjudge a shadow and lose nothing except a moment. Here misjudgment attaches a price to everything. That is the part of the story that resists narrative satisfaction. There are no fireworks when you succeed. There is often no report at all. The best day is the one that folds into the next without being noticed. Evening offers the false friendliness of dim light. People believe they are less visible because they feel cozier. Your job is to remove that feeling and replace it with measured caution. You hold still more often at dusk than at noon. You let the city turn into a set of silhouettes, and you do not trust your brain to fill shapes correctly. Your breath shows if you let it. You maintain the sleeve technique and accept that the air you inhale will be stale. You will sleep later, and your sleep will be the same, serviceable, incomplete, and better than nothing. When you finally retract into deeper cover, you carry with you the day's unspectacular wins. You stayed in the pattern. You respected the places where sound travels. You refused bait. You shared silence like equipment. You did not confuse fidgeting with work. You did not let discomfort write checks your position could not cash. You learned a new corner of airflow and added it to your map. You improved something tiny about your grip. You drank without coughing. You left no useful trace. You did not ask the city to give you anything. You collaborated with it just enough that it did not notice you were there. That is as close to mastery as this place allows. If you imagine staying longer, there are more lessons and none of them make a poster. You will discover that gear care is a daily promise, not a Saturday chore. Rust does not forgive. Grit infiltrates and requires persistent eviction. Oil stains tell stories to eyes trained to read them. You will learn to keep those stories short. You will learn that a single familiar object moved out of place can be a lighthouse to someone across the way. So you will stop moving familiar objects unless necessary, and when you must, you will move more than one, so the pattern dissolves. You will learn the difference between being stubborn and being steady. Stubbornness keeps you in a position that lost value an hour ago. Steadiness brings you back to a working routine after an interruption. You will also learn the weight of restraint in groups. Someone will want to show initiative, to take a mission that is not assigned because it looks important. You will watch and understand the urge, and then you will help them measure the cost in the plain terms you have adopted. Initiative is a virtue when the net has slack, and a vice when the net is taut. In a city like this, the net is often taut. You will become a translator for that simple fact and save someone from turning nerve into noise. Your body will continue to keep its own accounting. The skin under the sling will complain. The shoulder with the butt plate will develop a stubborn ache. The eye that nestles behind the scope will feel carved out if you let it, and you will prevent that by changing micro angles and blinking at deliberate intervals when the scene is safe. You will use heat packs if you have them, and if you do not, you will learn tricks with cloth and breath that add a small edge. You will get better at swallowing quietly, at settling the throat so a dry cough does not become a broadcast. You will stop thinking of these acts as heroic. You will think of them as maintenance. You might be asked later to explain what it felt like. You will consider telling a dramatic sequence because that is what listeners prefer. You will return instead to the plain structure you used to get through the day. The environment was stronger than you. You adjusted until it tolerated you. The rules were heavier than your appetite for action. You stayed within them, and the group stayed whole. Your body wanted to quit in small ways. You negotiated with it, and sometimes you lost, and sometimes you bought enough time to finish the shift. The story resists climax because climax is a luxury. The city is a teacher, with one lesson offered 1,000 ways. Patience over pride. You might still wonder whether you could last a day. The honest answer is that a single day is not a single thing here. It is a stack of moments that offer you chances to choose restraint over motion, silence over talk, patient doubt over confident error. If you can choose that way often enough to keep your outline small and your obligations fulfilled, the city may allow you to pass through another sunrise. If you choose the other way even a handful of times, the city will notice and begin to close the space around you. People later will call this luck. You will know it as compliance with conditions. If you insist on a rule you can carry beyond this place, you can carry this one. When supports vanish, discipline replaces them. When the environment tilts the field, humility replaces prediction. When the body budgets energy, patience replaces hurry. There is nothing mystical in that set. It is ordinary and hard. It is how people endure work that does not respect effort unless it is quiet and correct. A final truth sits at the edge of sleep. The people who endure here are not unforgettable heroes in the romantic sense. They are forgettable on purpose. Their gift is that they leave no shape on the city's memory. They measure air, avoid reflections, share silence without stealing it, and end days with nothing to show but a continued line on a ledger that only their group reads. You could try to be one of them. You would have to shed most of what modern life taught you. You would have to accept that most victories are invisible and most losses are abrupt. The trade is simple to describe and hard to make. You wrap the shelter half closer and make your bed from the floor that is available. The butt plate finds its place as if it were another bone. The rifle sleeps close because there is nowhere else for it to sleep. You taste dust and cloth and a trace of oil. You allow yourself one long breath that fogs the sleeve and vanishes. Tomorrow will look like today with a few small changes that matter. You will repeat simple sentences to yourself and trust them more than feelings. If you wake, you will do it all again, not because you love it, not because it flatters you, but because this is what endurance looks like when comfort is gone and noise is expensive. That is the answer to the question you asked at the start. You would not last a day by being special. You might last a day by being exact and quiet. And exact and quiet are not qualities your habits feed by default. They are choices you make under pressure, without a witness, in a room where the city measures you and says nothing. You wake from a thin sleep into a posture you rehearsed before lying down, the rifle already where your hands expect it, the cheek weld waiting like a familiar rung on a ladder. Habit here is built by subtraction. You remove everything you do not need until what remains answers for you when you are too slow. The city is not kinder in the morning, it is just less sure of its shapes. You keep your pace under that uncertainty, not ahead of it. A runner passes information through the chain without raising a voice. The message is ordinary and therefore important. Expect movement along a corridor 2 buildings over, adjust fields, avoid duplicating lines of sight, keep the net tight. You think in terms of coverage, not glory. The adjustment is small, but it touches everything. You shift your angle by the width of a brick, move your elbow point by the length of a palm, accept a slightly worse view that buys you a safer outline. You would not have made that trade months ago. You make it now, without ceremony. Light builds as if it were deciding whether to participate. You study a zone where smoke usually drifts, and today does not. The absence is data. Somewhere down the block an opening has closed or a fire has died. Air routes change, and with them the way sound travels. You store the note even if it never becomes relevant. The job is a ledger of notes, most of which never cash out. You keep writing because the one that matters will not announce itself as special. Someone else in the line of ruin coughs. It is not loud, but it is shaped wrong for this time of day. You feel the micro-recoil of annoyance and let it pass. You are not here to be larger than other people's mistakes. You are here to be smaller than their consequences. You tighten your attention around your space and make sure your part of the net does not fray in sympathy. The cough ends and the balance returns. You think about how often civilians talk about focus as if it were a heroic surge. Here focus is a temperature you maintain. Too hot, and it burns attention on the wrong objects. Too cold, and it lets the mind wander into guesses that look like insight. You keep it warm, not boiling. You feed it with small checks, the line of the reticle against a chipped frame, the drift of a thread on a torn curtain, the faintest texture change on dust that indicates breath where there should be none. You are not peering for a grand reveal. You are testing 100 little hypotheses against what the world offers back. Midday presses a lull that untrained people mistake for safety. You have learned that a lull is a test of your ability to keep doing less than you want. You allow yourself maintenance disguised as stillness. You adjust your sling to relieve pressure without betraying motion. You blink on a timer you set with your breath so your eyes do not dry into mistakes. You taste cloth and dust and swallow slowly, a quiet rehearsal of being ordinary in a place that punishes ordinary sounds. You do not reward yourself with talk. You pay yourself with more silence. Eventually, the plan asks for a relocation. You crawl the route you marked earlier with your eyes. The floor is a mosaic of materials that create different sounds under weight. You know which pieces carry noise, and you avoid stepping twice on the same texture in case someone is reading patterns from the opposite side. You do not pull a loose nail from a board, even though it catches your sleeve. That nail is part of the landscape other people have learned. Remove it, and you author a change that writes your presence across the street. You let it stay and modify your path. In the new position, the scope fogs, and you do not curse. You breathe patience into the sleeve and do the small ritual that prevents a second fog. People think technology solves conditions. Technology demands respect, or it amplifies conditions. You keep the glass clear without making a show of it. An edge of light threatens to glare. You solve it with a tilt that a casual observer would miss. The city rewards people who solve quietly. A figure appears briefly in a cross corridor, a human shape reduced to angles. Your body offers you a story and urges a decisive end. You do not accept the story until you check the frame for a second actor. You scan the margin, not the center. You confirm that the background does not move in a way that betrays staging. You measure the timing against the last gust you felt. You let a breath out and count just enough to remove hurry. When you finally act, it is without drama. The action is part of the system, not a performance. You do not wait around to admire an outcome, because outcomes do not belong to you alone. You shrink again and let the net reweave itself where you were a moment ago. After, your hands want to shake, and you do not let them by pretending to be made of iron. You let them shake a little and spend the energy. Then, you bring them back to work. Control here is not defiance. It is management. It is letting a reaction pass through a small opening you built for it so it does not blow out a wall somewhere else in your behavior. Afternoon insists on inventory. You count rounds by touch. You check the canteen by weight. You test the strap stitch that had started to fray the day before and take a moment to repair it with thread you keep in cloth, doing the work with numb fingers that do not want fine tasks. Your attention breaks this job into steps because the whole is too frustrating. Needle through, pull, knot, glove back on. You remind yourself that maintenance is not a pause in the mission. It is part of the mission. You have seen what happens when people treat it as optional. The city is harsh with optional things. A runner brings a note again, no words, a gesture you have learned, indicating adjustment in sectors when dusk sets in. You translate the plan into your corner with a few small changes in placement, a shift in where you rest the rifle, a decision to avoid a sight line that looks clean but puts your outline against a brighter wall. You warn a teammate with a touch that their scarf edge is reflecting. They fix it without a sound. These are the exchanges that never enter stories and carry more weight than speeches. As light thins, the air cools quicker than the brick, and currents form that were not there earlier. Your breath wants to show, and you enforce the sleeve discipline you promised yourself you would not forget. You taste old wool and the day's soot. You are not proud, and you are not aggrieved. You are effective. The difference matters more than it sounds. Pride draws shape. Aggrievement draws noise. Effectiveness draws nothing. Drawing nothing is the goal. You think about home because you are human, and the brain asks for familiar pictures when it is tired. You grant yourself a few. A kitchen where heat is not a signal, a sink where water arrives without planning, a chair that does not demand a strategy. You let the pictures go before they grow teeth and bite your concentration. Gratitude is acceptable here in small, private amounts. Longing is expensive. You cannot afford it. Night folds in. You return by the same route you used forward, adjusting in places where debris has shifted, and a scrape could broadcast that you repeated yourself. The routine in reverse is still work. You do not relax until the geometry of your corner returns. Even then, you do not truly relax. You allow your attention to perch on a lower branch. You eat a little, you drink a little. You let your back lean into a surface that remembers every person who leaned on it before. You repair a scrape, rewrap a strip of cloth, check a bolt's feel again, because you do not want a surprise snap when the cold deepens. Conversation, when it comes, is clipped and careful. Not because you fear ears in the wall at that exact moment, though that is always a possibility, but because economy has become your language. You do not waste syllables any more than you waste motion. You trade context instead of stories. You say enough to keep the net thinking, not enough to draw attention to yourself within it. A newcomer asks a question with the tone of someone who confuses initiative with impatience. You answer in plain terms that do not belittle and do not encourage recklessness. If they learn, tomorrow will be easier. If they do not, the city will instruct them, and you hope the lesson is not terminal. Sleep is the same as yesterday, partial, useful, unwilling. You take it like medicine. You do not expect miracle cures from it. You organize your clothes and gear to favor a quick rise, not comfort. You choose a position that makes you ready for interruption because interruption is the default. You fold your thoughts into a small square that fits into the quiet. You let the square sit under your tongue like a lozenge of patience. It is not poetic. It is practical. Another day arrives that looks like the last until you zoom into the details. The wind has a different character. The smoke lies flatter. The air smells less of oil and more of damp brick. All of it matters. You do not pretend omniscience. You pretend nothing. You collect, compare, and adapt. If you could explain what endurance means here, you would say it is the repeated choice to be uninteresting to the enemy and indispensable to the group. That choice is not available once. It is available many times, and each time is new. You consider how this will end for you, not because you are morbid, but because planning includes exits. You imagine walking out and finding that ordinary noises surprise you with their volume. You imagine learning again how to speak without reading the room for ricochet angles. You imagine doors that close. You allow yourself that hope in measured doses. It keeps your patience from curdling into bitterness. It keeps you careful without making you fragile. Late morning brings weather that plays tricks with hearing. The city hums low, nearly pleasant if you did not know better. You resist the idea that pleasant equals safe. You test the air with a small, controlled thing, a thread tied to a nail, hung where it can speak to you without shouting. It informs you of a shift you could have missed. You correct your assumptions. You thank the cheap tool for its honesty. You go back to your ledger of small truths. At some point you will leave this corner to someone else, and when you do, you will pass along knowledge as matter-of-factly as you pass a canteen. The draft that changes after midday, the face in the plaster that can fool you at certain angles, the floorboard that talks, the path that looks short and attracts attention, the angle that avoids glare at the cost of a slightly worse view. The thread test, the trick with breath and sleeve that keeps your position from blooming steam. These are not secrets, they are common property, and you add to them like a citizen adds to a road fund. If you are looking for a banner, you will not find one. If you are looking for a sentence you can carry home and use as a handle, you might choose this. The world is not impressed by your plans. It responds to your adjustments. Here, adjustment is not a performance. It is a habit. It begins with the humility to understand that the city is heavier than you are, the rules are heavier than your impulse, and the body is lighter than you imagine. It ends, if you are lucky, with another evening where your outline does not appear to anyone who would profit from seeing it. You asked why you would not last a day. The answer did not arrive as a single blow. It arrived as a list of small prices that you must pay, without drama, on time, repeatedly, with care. Most people are not set up to pay them because modern life spreads those prices across systems that shield you. Here the shield is you and the people around you, and the payments are due in silence, stillness, patience, and the willingness to let the environment teach you faster than pride does. You can learn that for a day. You can learn it for 2. The city will ask you to learn it again tomorrow, and there is no certificate. There is only the fact that you are still here and the line still holds. When night arrives again, you close the loop without thinking of it as a loop. The rifle rests where it will be useful in a second. The shelter half makes a space that will not show light. You eat the same ration with the same purpose. You decide nothing that is not yours to decide. You put your faith not in revenge and not in luck, but in the quiet, slow acts you have practiced until they are boring. Boring here is not a problem. Boring is how you live long enough to see boredom again.